Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
This is Book 4 of the Wolfman Chronicles, Chapter 12, A Night of Campfire Stories. And this takes place in Alaska. The Legend of Old Miner Bill and the Blue Mist, Part 2. Legend. Miner Bill was a colorful character in the history of Estes Park, Colorado, known to have some strange tendencies, and had even spent some time inside of an insane asylum. When he was released, he set to prospecting in the Horseshoe Park area, which is now the Rocky Mountain National Park. He filed 2 mining claims, and he began constructing a cabin and trails for access to these mines. Often he would come into town for supplies, and he had a habit of talking to himself and of the divine. He had a fear of something he liked to call the blue mist. According to Bill, on cloudy nights near his cabin, a being would manifest and a blue mist would appear in the trees. It would always leave 3-toed claw marks in the snow and on the trees around the cabin. Animals were often found dead with nothing left but bones, and Bill believed there was a connection. Now, Bill went missing and was eventually found dead with nothing left but bones, along with 3-toed animal tracks surrounding him. The campfire crackled in the cool night air, but the extended twilight added a magical glow. Sasha was curled up with a blanket in her camp chair, while Jack stoked the fire and Grizzly poured himself another glass of whiskey. He was in rare form tonight, joking and laughing. You know a campfire can do that for you. After Jack was settled into his camp chair, Grizzly cleared his throat and began his story. It was in the summer of 1957. I had recently come out here mining when I ran into a gnarled old man panning up on Birch Creek. He paid me no mind. Didn't even look up when I offered a hello. I was surprised to see anyone out here and wondered what he was doing on my land. Remember, I told you I had just purchased this large parcel of land, and Birch Creek runs through most of it. Technically, this guy was trespassing. Well, I was young and I was green and I didn't want no trouble, so I just let him be. But I marked in my mind his location so I could see if he'd moved on the very next day. Well, for several days after that, he was darn near right on that same spot, so I knew it was a hot location. I figured I'd wait till he moved on and then try it for myself. And after several days of tagging him, he finally spoke up and asked me what my business was. Well, I told him I'd like to ask the same of him, being as this was my land. Well, he looked me up one side and down the other and figured I was way too young to be holding claim to this parcel, so he just ignored me. Day after day I watched him. He finally got annoyed with me being there and started asking me questions. And it was because of that we just sort of expected to see each other every day. It was late summer, and I had been building this cabin to stay in through the winter. Bill came down to see what I was up to, and he ended up staying that whole winter with me. You know, he was crazier than a pet coon. He'd have night vision sometimes. He'd start rambling about things like that divine nature of God and his place in the world. He was afraid to go out at night. He said he'd seen things that just weren't natural. Well, it was dead silent here at night except for the occasional hoot of an owl. I'm sure you've already found that out for yourself. And one night, Bill was really agitated. He said something was out there. He could feel it in his bones. Well, I got up to look out the window of the cabin. I couldn't see nothing. It was dark as could be. I just told him there weren't nothing out there, and he got up to look for himself. See, he asked me, right out there, right by them trees. Don't you see it? Well, I looked out that window again, and I tried to focus my eyes on the trees outside the cabin. I don't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me or some kind of illusion, but I swear I saw a blue mist floating through the trees, coming right towards the cabin. Old Bill was shaking like a leaf. He said it was coming for him, that it had been chasing him for years now. He was inconsolable. I gave him another shot of whiskey and told him to go to bed, that I'd sit up with my shotgun and keep an eye on the door. Neither one of us got a wink of sleep that night. I kept going over to the window and looking out, and that blue mist just seemed to linger there all night long, moving from one tree to the next. It wasn't a dense mist. It was more like a fog. You could see right through it. But there was something really eerie and strange about it. You see, it glowed, like a phosphorescence type of glow. Well, finally, nearing morning, it just kind of left. Once it was light enough to see, which as you'll soon find out, it never really gets light in the winter here. It's kind of like now. It's kind of a perpetual twilight during the daylight hours. But it was light enough to look up into the trees where that blue mist had been hanging out, and sure enough, there were claw marks there. Long, serious, three-toed claw marks. Now, how in the heck did that blue mist make them marks? Well, Bill went on to tell me that he'd started seeing them a few years back when he was prospecting several miles away from here. He said that whatever it was, it ran him out of the forest. He followed the creek downstream and camped out near here for a week or so and didn't see no sign of it, so he figured it was just up there, higher up the mountain. He began to think it was just a trick of his mind. Well, about that time, he wasn't having no luck, so he quit his prospecting and panning, headed to Fairbanks, where he caught a ride with some people who was moving out to Colorado. He figured he'd give that lower 48 a try. But while he was gone, he just kept thinking about this pretty little birch creek here in Alaska, where he'd had some luck previously, and that's what brought him back here a couple years later. That's about the time I met him. Now, Bill was quite a bit older than me, and I wondered if he was maybe not quite right in the mind, and it was affecting me as well. So I just decided to ignore that there blue mist and those strange claw marks and chalk it up some kind of gold fever. But then, later that winter, on a particularly snowy night, we heard noises outside. Eerie noises. I wouldn't exactly call it the sound an owl makes at night, or even a cougar, but something kind of in between. Kind of a caw mixed with a scream. We ran to the window and strained our eyes into the darkness, and sure enough, here it come, drifting through the trees from the direction of the river. A blue mist. Where it had been silent before, it was now filled with sound. It made my hair on my neck stand straight up. I grabbed my rifle. What am I going to shoot at? Mist? My cabin was completely engulfed with this blue mist, and it looked to be sliding in under the door. So we grabbed the blankets off the bed and pushed them against the door frame and the windowsills. Then we sat and we waited. My gun trained at the front door and Bill's at the back. We heard scratching on the cabin walls and the door. We was both terrified. We sat there all night long like that, hearing a noise and a whipping around to look that direction, then hearing it on a different outside wall. Finally, it just left. Nothing. Silence. Well, neither one of us wanted to get up and look outside, afraid of what might still be out there. Morning came. There hadn't been any sounds for a good long while, so I finally got up the nerve to look out the window. I didn't see anything. I carefully opened the door, just a crack, but nothing happened. So I opened the door the rest of the way, and what I saw was unbelievable. There were scratch marks down the outside of the door and all around the cabin. Long marks made by some kind of three-toed creature. Not a bird, though. They were too large for that. In fact, you can still see them right there. I'll show you tomorrow. Grizzly poured himself another whiskey. Well, did you see them again after that? Sasha asked. No, Bill was real shook up. He left that day for Fairbanks, hitching a ride with a feller that brought our mail to us once a month. Said he was moving back to Colorado. Oh, once Bill was gone, that blue mist was gone too. I can't tell you what it was. It's as mysterious to me as it is to you. But I did see Bill another time after that. He was a lot older, and he'd come here for a visit. Said he wanted to convince me to move out to Colorado with him. He'd built himself a cabin up near Estes Park and had laid claim to some land and a couple mines up there. He didn't stay long, and I didn't want to leave my place here, so that was the end of that. But, as the story goes, Bill kept seeing that blue mist even after he'd moved to Colorado. And the claw marks? Yeah, he'd gotten himself a dog, and one night he had a friend visited him, named Troy. Well, they had just finished dinner when that dog started acting crazy, growling and trembling. And old Miner Bill went into a rage. He yelled, "It's been after me for 6 years." Troy and Bill went out into the night with lanterns because Troy had been trying to convince the old man that he needed to leave the cabin and live in a home for people who weren't right in their minds. And old Miner Bill wanted to prove to Troy that he wasn't crazy. Troy says that Bill held his lantern aloft, shining its light into the spruce in front of the cabin, illuminating 3 deep grooves that had been etched high beyond the reach of a black bear. They returned to the cabin, but the dog just wouldn't settle. Troy looked out the window, and he saw a blue mist drawn into the clearing. He thought it was a trick of the moonlight, but the mist kept drifting towards the cabin. And then suddenly, the blue light just took off. It just disappeared. Hell, Troy, once he'd seen that, he just couldn't sleep the rest of the night. The very next day, Troy had to go back to work in Salt Lake City, and it was another 3 weeks before he would make it back up to Bill's cabin. He had decided that even if the old man didn't want to leave, he would force him to come back to Estes Park with him. His first night back, a strange storm struck the mountains. Troy's fitful sleep was broken by Miner Bill, in another one of his panics. His dog had been bolted to a chain in the middle of the cabin floor, but had broken his chain and lunged for the door. The dog managed to get outside and circled the trunk of the spruce tree out front. Suddenly, the dog fell to the ground. His throat was slashed wide open. Miner Bill unloaded his shotgun into that spruce tree. Then he too fell back, his head bleeding heavily from slash marks. Troy rushed Bill to a one-room clinic in town. He managed to save Miner Bill's life, but the old man's mind was never the same again. He was put in a state home where he lived for 5 years, ever restless, ever obsessed with his cabin in the woods, dreaming nightly of the 3-toed claw marks in the blue mist. When he was finally released, he returned to that cabin. He used to go into town for supplies, and the townsfolk kind of watched out for him, checking in on him if they hadn't seen him for a few days. Well, one day, after he hadn't been seen for several days, some of the townsfolk got worried and went up to check on him. They found his dead body laying in front of the cabin. The bones were picked clean, and there were 3-toed claw marks all around the body. Miner Bill's cabin is still out there, you know, and so are those 3-toed claw marks. Have there been any sightings of that strange blue mist since Bill's death? Sasha asked him. Yeah, there's been several cases of missing people up in Rocky Mountain National Park. A few have claimed to see a blue mist rising up from the lakes and the streams there. Some of the folks have been found, others have not, Grizzly told her. Well, now that's quite a story, Jack conceded. He glanced over at Sasha, wondering how she was taking all this in. He didn't want her to be afraid to live here, especially now that she'd had such a strange encounter with something or someone herself. He got up and threw a couple more logs on the fire, then pulled his chair a little closer to Sasha's. Well, tell us more, Sasha asked, wrapping the blanket just a little tighter around herself. She enjoyed ghost stories, tales of the supernatural, the fairy tales. This was the first time she'd sat around a campfire listening to stories, and she thought how fun it would be to have everyone here. Jack's family, her daughter. She and Jack had shared campfires over the last month or so during their nights camping, and that had been more romantic, drinking wine and cuddling. That was nice too, but she sure did enjoy the storytelling. Grizzly set his whiskey glass down on the ground and he said, "Give me some of that coffee." There was an old tin coffee pot on a rock next to the fire, staying warm. Jack poured him a cup, proceeded to pour the rest of his whiskey into the cup. Then he continued, "Oh, not much exciting has happened around here for quite some time, but not counting you guys showing up. I had a run-in with a squatch a few months back, early spring I think it was, but he hadn't been back in a while." "A squash?" Sasha asked curiously. Grizzly laughed at that and sprayed out his mouth full of coffee. "You are one heck of a city girl, aren't you? Yeah, a big old squash." He laughed so hard he was spilling the coffee out of his cup. "I'm talking about a Sasquatch, you know, a Bigfoot. We got 'em here. They mostly stay up in the rocky outcroppings, up on the mountain, above the place where there's caves and thick forest. They don't come down here much unless they're looking for something particular. Well, last spring, one of the young'uns decided he wanted to take old Molly. Well, she weren't having none of that, and she's not going to be breakfast for nobody. I seen her fight off a wildcat and a pack of wolves. That Bigfoot didn't stand a chance." "You saw it?" Sasha asked him. "Well, hell yeah, I saw it. I chased that bugger all the way back into the woods, pointing my rifle right at him. He was a young'un, only about 7 foot tall, kind of scrawny-like compared to the big uns. Molly was a kicking and a snorting and causing all kinds of ruckus out in her pen, but I seen more of 'em over the years. They wander through here every now and then and steal things out of the garden, or I see them walking through the trees. I don't bother them, and they don't bother me. When my sweet Jessie was alive, she used to leave food out for 'em. She'd bake cakes or pies or cookies and leave them out there on that big rock over yonder. And when she died, I buried her right over there by that rock, and I swear for days afterwards I'd find flowers left right there on her grave. Flowers I didn't put there." "Well, that is so sweet," Sasha replied. "They knew that she was gone." "Mm-hmm. For days after she died, I sat out on the porch and I cried. They were watching. They knew." "I never would have believed any of this real a few years ago," Jack replied. "Where I grew up in Montana, we had stories about Bigfoot in Yellowstone and up in the mountains. Legends, stories. I never believed any of it. But these past couple years, I've seen things I never could have imagined would be true." "Yeah, well, I could say the same thing," Grizzly replied. "Before I met Jessie, I didn't believe in any of this stuff either. Even after seeing that blue mist and hearing old Bill's stories, I didn't really believe that things like Sasquatch or werewolves or any of the rest of this craziness existed. But Jessie was the one who told me about the Wolfens. It led me to believe that werewolves actually exist in our world. And then, of course, there's nothing like seeing a Bigfoot in the wild to make you a believer in the impossible. There's still enough wilderness out here in Alaska to hide all kinds of crazy things." Grizzly continued. "There was one night, must have been at least a couple years ago, that I started seeing lights in the woods here. Now, it was winter, so I thought it was just a phenomenon of ice crystals in the air. They were little orbs of light, twinkling and floating around out there in the trees. It was real pretty, kind of like having my own Christmas decorations all over the place. But I never did figure out what it was that caused that light." Jack got up and refreshed Grizzly's coffee and poured a swig of whiskey in it. "I remember reading an article last year about an orb," Jack started. "I don't know if you heard about it. It was last September, 23. There were scientists aboard the NOAA's ship called the Okeanos Explorer. They discovered a mysterious golden orb on the ocean floor. Now, this is about 2 miles beneath the surface in the Gulf of Alaska. The orb was spotted during the Seascape Alaska 5 expedition, which is known for exploring deep water habitats and unexplored regions off Alaska's coast. The orb, it was iridescent. It had a hole, and it felt fleshy, which led some researchers to think it was kind of an egg of some kind. Well, they brought it to the surface, collected a sample to study in the lab, but they were unable to identify it beyond being biological in origin. Grizzly spoke up. About a year ago, there were some folks in Fairbanks who said they saw a large orb of light moving across the early morning sky. They even took a video of it. It seemed like it had something that was spinning inside of it, like a small tail. But then some astronomer from Harvard said it was seen the same time that a Chinese satellite-deployed rocket had flown over. He figured it was just the dumping of fuel from the rocket and that it froze, spread out, and reflected the sunlight. I guess rocket fuel dumps are pretty common in the lower 48 and elsewhere in the world. I'm sure plenty of that happens up here in Alaska. Now Sasha spoke up. I saw an orb of light over the sky in Russia once, and others reported seeing it from as far away as northern Siberia. It was attributed to exhaust from ballistic missiles during test firings. I guess some of these strange phenomena are explainable, but others certainly are not. At that time, an owl that had been perched in a nearby tree suddenly swooped down, flying low over Sasha's chair. It made everyone jump. Jack laughed. I remember a movie that came out about 20 years ago about these mysterious disappearances in Nome, Alaska. It was a science fiction thriller called The Fourth Kind. It was supposedly based on true events in which a psychologist used hypnosis to uncover the memories of alien abduction from her patients. Now, I don't remember much about it, but there was something about a white owl appearing whenever these gray-skinned aliens were around. Oh, yeah, Grizzly laughed. We got white owls. Snowy owls they're called. Look like giant snowballs sitting in a tree. At night they'll swoop down and scare the bejesus out of you, but they're harmless. I see a lot of them. But I ain't never seen any gray-skinned aliens hanging around here. He had to laugh at that. I think the biggest mystery Alaska has is the Alaskan Triangle. Have you heard of that? Well, Sasha and Jack both shook their heads. Tell us, Sasha replied. Well, over 20,000 people have mysteriously vanished over the Alaskan Triangle. Now, that's a lot of people. They say some 2,250 people disappear every year flying over that triangle that stretches from Anchorage to Juneau to the Barrows. Kind of makes you wonder why the heck they still fly over it. But it's not just planes that disappear and are never seen again. There's been plenty of hunters and hikers that have never been seen again, too. There's been sightings of UFOs and ghosts, Bigfoot creatures, electromagnetic disturbances, abductions, even signs of wendigos in that part of Alaska. There's been a bunch of people that have disappeared from Fairbanks, too. One of the weirdest was old Leonard Lane. He was a 73-year-old World War II veteran, and he was just enjoying the 4th of July parade in Fairbanks back in 1995 when he just vanished. He would have been easy to see because he walked with a limp from his war injuries. You know, they never figured out what happened to him. He was there one minute and he was gone the next. But there's been all kinds of people just disappear from the area. I guess if you're wanting to make someone think you disappeared, well, this is a place to do it. Jack nodded. I'll keep that in mind. Glanced over at Sasha. That might just come in handy someday, he added. Have you heard of the Kashtaka? Grizzly asked. Jesse told me about him. In their native folklore, they believe others can shapeshift into terrifying creatures that prey on explorers that are lost in the wilderness. The Tlingit believe that these Kashtaka can disguise themselves as a relative or someone you already know and trust, and they'll act like they're lost or injured. So you go to help them, and they lead you deep into the wild, where they'll tear you apart and eat you, or they'll turn you into another Kashtaka. All this talk is getting me nervous, Sasha replied. I think we should call it a night before I get too creeped out. I still don't know what happened to me the other night, but things haven't been the same since. I'm having crazy dreams, and today, while Jack was fixing that door downstairs, I walked out in the meadow with these dogs. I looked and I looked for that path that I was on that day, you know, the one with all the flowers, and that rock with the pool of water. I couldn't find it. Now, I knew exactly where it should be, but it just wasn't there. It makes me wonder if I dreamt the whole thing. But then I couldn't have, because Jack found me. Well, I don't think you need to be scared, sweetheart, Grizzly said. If they want to eat you, they would have. Gee, thanks, Sasha replied. She got up, folded her blanket over her arm, and grabbed the coffee pot to take it in. Jack poured the bucket of water over the coals and stirred the fire. Thanks, Grizz, for the campfire. This was fun. We'll have to do it again. Grizz nodded his head. Hope I didn't scare the girl too bad. Oh, Sasha, she'll be fine. She's seen worse things than ghosts. She's tough. And she's got me, Jack replied. He helped Grizzly get up out of the chair and gave him the cane. Grizz was doing better now. His leg was a-healing. But the cancer that was eating his bones was making him weak. You know, Grizz, I mentioned this to you the other day about Sasha and I leaving for a couple weeks. We got a wedding to go to in Mexico. Why don't you come with us? Grizzly stopped and faced Jack. I ain't never been out of the state of Alaska, and I intend to die here. There is no way in hell you can drag me to Mexico. Well, I just don't like leaving you here alone, Jack replied. Go to hell, Grizzly replied. I'm an old man. I've had plenty of years taking care of myself. I don't need no damn babysitting. I told you I want you to make sure I die here, in my own cabin, and what I want done with my body after I'm gone. But I didn't ask you to coddle me. I ain't going nowhere. Okay, I get it. I just wanted to ask, just in case you wanted a little adventure. That there campfire is all the excitement I needed, he replied. Well, then there's one more thing, Jack said. We're going to be bringing some family back with us. My sister and her husband and 2 little ones are going to stay with us for a bit. I just wanted to warn you. Ah, hell, Grizzly replied and slammed the cabin door in Jack's face. Jack turned and grinned to Sasha. He's gonna love 'em.